In the shadows of the great clover forest, the colony faced its dampest hour. The floods had come, and the brave engineers of the 4th Infantry were tasked with the impossible, seafaring. Commander Redjaw didn't know much about water, but he knew his brothers were stranded on the other side. He stood tall, a beacon of hope, or at least a beacon of very shiny chitin. Morale was high. Competence, however, was a different story. Private Pincers was already proving that ants were meant for the soil, not the sea. They set sail into the Great Ditch. To a human, it was a puddle. To the rescue platoon, it was the Atlantic. And they were the masters of the leaf. But the Great Ditch wasn't empty. Deep below, a monster of scales and hunger felt the vibrations of their tiny oars. The shadow had arrived, the commander giving a sign to stop. The beast didn't just swim, it dominated. A single flick of its tail turned their naval fleet into a sinking salad. The plan was literally blowing away. Navigation was now down to 2 things: instinct and not being eaten. It was time for a human-like strategy. If you can't outswim it, out-rocket it. The Nitro Leaf Project was born. Pincers had one job, one spark, but his knees were knocking loud enough to alert every fish in the pond. The commander didn't have time for stage fright. He gave the fuse a kiss of fire and prayed to the Queen they wouldn't end up on the moon. 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't safe, but it was definitely faster than rowing. The shadow missed its lunch by a chitin's hair. For the first time in history, a bug had outrun a shark. They say ants can't fly, but with enough gunpowder and a sturdy leaf, they can certainly reach the clouds. The rescue was only a crash landing away. The landing was less majestic naval arrival and more uncontrolled garden accident, but they had arrived. A leader knows that style is 10% strategy and 90% looking like you intended to fall into a puddle of sludge. For those trapped in the aluminum fortress, the sight of Redjaw's muddy face was better than a mountain of sugar. Private Pincers found a weapon of legend. It was plastic, smelled like a cherry martini, and was completely impractical. He loved it. The shadow was a sore loser. If it couldn't eat them on the water, it would simply bring the water and its teeth to the shore. They didn't have a boat anymore, and the monster was hungry. It was time for some high-stakes engineering. Science was the only thing standing between them and a fish's belly. Well, science and a very lucky twig. The path to safety was narrow, slippery, and smelled like damp oak. But it was the most beautiful road they'd ever seen. It was the ant equivalent of Dunkirk. Every second counted, and every footstep was a prayer that the wood would hold. Pincers learned the hard way that legendary weapons are great for posters, but terrible for narrow hallways. The vibration was a dinner bell. Below the surface, the shadow saw its chance for a mid-air snack. For a brief second, the sun was eclipsed by scales. It was the most terrifyingly beautiful thing the commander had ever seen, mostly because it didn't eat him. The shadow's missed strike left behind a watery disaster. The Bridge of Hope had suddenly become a slide of doom. Redjaw wasn't going to let his crew wash away. He anchored his soul and his baton into the wood and stood like a rock in the stream. Once again, Pince's love for oversized toys saved his life. Sometimes being impractical is the best survival strategy. In the chaos, a miracle drifted by. A cargo of dried chili pepper seeds, the only thing spicy enough to make a koi fish regret its life choices. This was the ant way. One mind, many legs. Together, they pulled their last hope out of the drink. It was time to season the water. If the fish wanted a bite, Redjaw was going to make sure it was a spicy one. The shadow was tired of games. It was coming in hot, fast, and very, very hungry. David had his stone. Redjaw had a chili pepper. It was time for a miniature revolution. Bullseye. The secret ingredient had been delivered. They say some like it hot, but the shadow was definitely not a fan of spicy cuisine. The predator had finally found something it couldn't swallow. The beast had been seasoned and defeated. For the first time, the food chain had a very spicy malfunction. Victory was sweet, but the bridge was sour. The bridge of hope was about to become the splinters of despair. There was no time for a victory lap. The commander knew that in the garden, the only thing worse than a predator was a structural failure. In a twist of pure, unadulterated luck, Pince's junk store weapon became the only thing holding the world together. It was the most expensive bridge support in history. As the plastic gave way, the last of the refugees flew toward the shore. The bridge of hope was gone, but the crew was whole. Redjaw landed on the grass with the grace of a bug who had stared death in the eye and blinked second. The soil had never felt so good. Safe, solid, and most importantly, not wet. A hero's weapon was lost, but for Pince's, the world was full of new, shiny things to accidentally save everyone with. The mission was a success. The leaf boat rescue would be told in the tunnels for generations. A story of fire, fish, and the bravest idiots in the garden. The water was quiet now, but the commander knew tomorrow they might just have to build a plane.